This morning, the Westchester Health Commissioner explains why there's no cause for alarm as 26 county residents are being monitored for the coronavirus. Plus, Black History Month. We'll hear from a pastor trying to revive the oldest African American institution in New York. And hear our analysts' take on Wednesday's Democratic slugfest debate.
Now from 42nd and 2nd, this is New York's very own Pix 11 News Closeup with Marvin Scott.
Good morning. As of Friday, the coronavirus has sickened more than 76,000 people worldwide and has spread to 24 countries outside mainland China. The death toll now in excess of 2,100. There have been 15 confirmed cases here in the United States, none as of this taping in New York or New Jersey. However, Westchester County has quarantined 24 residents who recently returned from areas where the virus is prevalent. To give us more details, I'm pleased to welcome Dr. Sherlita Amler. She's the Westchester County Health Commissioner. Thank you so much for coming in. Now, these people are not sick and not hospitalized. Why have they been quarantined?
Well, they're traveling in from China primarily, and we want to make sure that they come back into their home in a safe way for both themselves, their family, those they care about in their community. So we need to monitor them to make sure that they don't become sick, that they don't have symptoms of the coronavirus, and if they do, to ensure that they get treated and that they don't expose anyone else to this virus.
So this is a proactive measure? You're following the Centers for Disease Control protocol?
That's absolutely correct. We're ensuring that people who are high or medium risk for exposure to this virus, that they don't become ill and spread it to others.
Now, how long will they be quarantined and how do you monitor them?
So the incubation period for coronavirus is about 14 days. So they will be monitored for 14 days from the date that they left China. Or had an exposure to a known case if that were to occur. And preferably, we hope to keep them in their home as long as they can be remained in their home without exposing anyone else.
Now, you and the county executive, George Latimer, had a news conference the other day, and you said there's a greater epidemic of fear than really a threat of this coronavirus surfacing in Westchester. Is that true?
That's absolutely true. The risk is only there if you are exposed. So if we can avoid exposures, we can avoid risk to the population. And right now in the United States, as you know, there are only 15 cases. None of those in New York, and no one has died. So we want to continue to protect the population.
But it's important not to overreact, but also not to underreact.
Exactly. It should be a measured response. So we want people to be aware what their risk is, what they can do to protect themselves. But, you know, it's not a cause for a huge alarm. Our risk in this country right now is really quite low, very low risk.
So what are the symptoms? That's the question that people keep asking. How should I know whether I've got this coronavirus or I just got a little cold?
And that is the problem. And that's one of the reasons we're telling people, be sure you get your flu shot, because the symptoms are actually very similar. Coronavirus, a type of coronavirus, not the novel new one, also causes the common cold. So the symptoms are very similar. So a person could have a cough, they could have a sore throat. They might have, if they were really symptomatic, they could have a shortness of breath, but most commonly is probably a fever and a cough.
High fever.
Could be, but it would start out low and they could get a high fever, but certainly a fever and a cough with exposure to someone who had coronavirus, the new novel coronavirus. At that point, they would need testing.
Now, what are the precautions? How can we protect ourselves? What are the precautions people can take to stay healthy and not get the virus or get anything else?
Well, obviously, we only have 15 cases in the United States, so the risk of exposure are low for the average resident. The people who are really at risk are those people who've had traveled to China in the last 14 days, and that's why those individuals are being asked to isolate themselves in their home and avoid contact with others as a precautionary measure.
Now, you did mention a moment ago about flu shots. If you had a flu shot this year, are you at lesser of a risk of getting this?
Doesn't make you less of a risk of getting coronavirus, but certainly many, many more people, tens of thousands of people die in this country every year from influenza, from the flu. Yet there's a vaccine to prevent that. And the symptoms are very similar. So if you get your flu shot, you're less likely to have those symptoms, less likely to be concerned, do I in fact have coronavirus, and less likely to die because you're much more at risk of dying from influenza in this country.
To back that up with the fact, 45 million people in this country, 1 in 7 get the flu each year, and 61,000 of them, according to the statistics I read, die from it.
Absolutely.
So it's a greater risk of getting the regular flu, not the coronavirus.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So it's spread to 24 countries, and you feel that the risk right now is very minimal in the United States?
That is correct. We've only had 15 cases, and as I said before, no deaths and no cases in New York State.
Now, the question is, going ahead in the future, is there a vaccine? I know we have vaccine for so many illnesses. Is there a vaccine that I believe I read just the other day that one has been developed by some pharmaceutical company in Texas, that they're working on a vaccine that would...
They are working on a vaccine, that is correct, but then it will have to go to human trials, and no one can say at this point in time how long it will take us to get a vaccine. And there is currently no antiviral therapy, so really it's supportive care. So no vaccine, no antiviral, supportive care. So the real risk is avoid, what we really want people to do is avoid exposure.
And the truth is that the people recover on their own. There's no medical treatment for it.
That is correct. So, they get dehydrated, we give them fluids. It's supportive care.
How does this compare to previous viruses, epidemics we've had in this country? We had SARS, we had HIV.
Certainly. So SARS is also caused by a coronavirus, as was MERS, which is the Middle East respiratory disease. The fatality rate for SARS is greater. The fatality rate for SARS was about 12%. Currently, from what we know, the mortality rate from this novel coronavirus is currently thought to be around 2%.
Will this abate as we get into warmer weather? Is this something that's really particular in cold times?
Well, it's more likely that in cold times, people are indoors together, grouped together. When the weather improves, the windows open, people get outside. So we may see that, like the common cold, like influenza, we have less cases in the summer. That ways to be seen. So
to end this, again, a reminder that there's no reason to be alarmed, even though you have a number of Westchester residents who are voluntarily quarantined because they travel to countries where the virus is prevalent, but there's no reason for alarm?
There's absolutely no reason for alarm at this time.
On that assurance, I will say thank you to Dr. Shalita Amler, Westchester County Health Commissioner.
Thank you.
And we'll take a break. When we come back, we'll have a special story for you on Black History Month.
You're watching New York's very own Pix 11 News Closeup with Marvin Scott.
A pastor in Harlem is giving a history lesson about his own church, and he's hoping to pass it on to the next generation. He is discovering the stories that make it one of the most famous black churches in the world, including connections to the Underground Railroad. Now, that history is being turned into a museum. Ayanna Harry has the story from inside Mother Zion Church in Harlem.
I'm thrilled by this legacy.
On Harlem's 137th Street, this house of worship sits between apartment buildings. Their sign outside is modest, but beyond the red doors.
We are the oldest black institution in New York State.
Mother AME Zion Church holds so many rich stories of African Americans here in New York.
But we were regarded as the grand depot of the Underground Railroad.
In 1774, they first started meeting in Lower Manhattan as a secret anti-slavery society. Their members were at the heart of the movement.
Frederick Douglass, and it was at the altar of Mother Zion in 1843 that she changed her name from Isabella Baumfree to Sojourner Truth. Harriet Tubman, one of our prominent members as well.
As many as 700 runaway slaves took refuge in the church's hidden vault. By the Harlem Renaissance, Mother AME Zion was home to notable New Yorkers like Madam C.J. Walker.
Madam C.J. Walker was the first African-American millionaire.
In June, Reverend Malcolm Byrd became the senior pastor. He's a millennial with a deep love for preserving the church's artwork and artifacts, like this original James Van Der Zee photograph. A growing museum tucked away in the church's basement is his latest project.
This was from 1820, 7 years before the abolition of slavery in New York State. It's their family.
Reverend Byrd faces the familiar challenges of a faith leader in today's Harlem. As the neighborhood undergoes rapid change, there have been generous offers to purchase the church building as property values here skyrocket.
I have made it very clear that Mother AME Zion Church is not for sale.
Reverend Byrd is committed to keeping the doors open for the families that have been attending services right in these pews for generations, and for very special members like Catherine Dixon. She's been attending service every Sunday for her entire life, and this spring she turns 100. Reporting from Harlem, Ayanna Harry, Pix 11 News.
Thank you, Ayanna. We're good to have Reverend Byrd in the studio with us. So good to have you here.
Thrilled to be here.
There's so much of the history. How are you going about resurrecting all of this history and the artifacts that you're collecting for the museum?
The beautiful thing about the history of Mother AME Zion Church, and further the history of Black America, is that it has a way of resurrecting itself. It comes alive during times and periods in our history when we need to hear these historical lessons even the more. And as we would say in that old Negro spiritual, right now is a needy time.
Mm-hmm. Well, this church actually was founded going back, if I have my date correct, 1796?
1796.
By African American members of a predominantly white church down on a Methodist church on John Street.
Yes.
Yet that church, even though abolitionist, it was segregationist.
Yes, yes. The pot began to boil over as the black members of the John Street Methodist Church began to outnumber the white members. You have to understand, this is 1796. There was no concept in New York of black people having an institution or a church of their own. So the black members of John Street decided to leave to establish their own church. And here, 223 years later, here we are.
But back then, even though they were members of the church, they didn't allow the black members to take sacrament.
They did, but on the second Sunday.
Second.
The white members would take the sacrament on the first Sunday, black members on the second Sunday, and we still continue that tradition of second Sunday communion.
There's so much history here, but it goes back. The church came to be known as the Freedom Church.
Yes.
And its relationship to the Underground Railroad.
Yes.
Tell me about that.
Well, we were the Grand Depot of the Underground Railroad. We were the largest, most preeminent stop on the Underground Railroad in New York City. Yes.
Now, history has it that you really provided refuge for 700 runaway slaves.
That's about the number we're able to pinpoint. Between 700 to 800 runaway slaves seeking freedom passed through Mother AME Zion Church.
Now, you had Harriet Tubman and Frederick Douglass.
Yes,
and
Sojourner Truth, who joined our church in 1829 and was a member from 1829 to 1843.
And then you also have members who have been part of this congregation for for decades, for almost the whole millennium, right?
Yes, indeed.
You have, Madam C.J. Walker?
Madam C.J. Walker.
The first millionaire African-American?
And it also should be noted, she was the first female self-made millionaire in America, Madam C.J. Walker.
Curious. Tell me more about her.
She was tremendous. She created her own company regarding hair care products. She was an incredible philanthropist. She put a lot of her money behind black colleges in the South, behind the NAACP. She was tremendous in every sense of the word, and she was a member of our church until 1919 when she died.
Now, you've uncovered some really priceless artifacts, which you're putting into the basement museum there. First, I have to ask you, is the church open to visitors?
Absolutely. The church is open every day by appointment, but the museum is open every Sunday from 12:30 until about 3 p.m. So persons are more than welcome to come in and to view the artifacts.
Let me go back to the beginning of that question about the artifacts. Tell me about some of them.
Oh, we have manumission papers in our museum going back to the early 1800s. These are freedom papers that allowed African Americans who were free to pass through territories to proclaim their freedom. We have newspapers going back to the 1700s. And actually, the crypt of our church's founder is also downstairs in our museum.
Now, the demographics of Harlem have changed since you moved in there. How is that? What challenges has that presented to you, and how has it impacted you?
Well, obviously, gentrification is really not a new thing in New York. Black communities in New York have been gentrified for 200 years, and every time it happens, we've had to move to greener pasture. Harlem is a little different. Black people have such cultural capital in Harlem. There is no plans on our church to move. But the question now is, how do we coexist in a neighborhood that's no longer 95% black? The church was once, at the height of the Harlem Renaissance, we had 7,000 members. Now we're down to less than 500. The neighborhood dynamics, the changing times, is proof of what's going on. But there is a resilience of persons moving to Harlem who want to be part of a social justice institution with the credibility to address the needs of our community because we've been doing it for over 200 years.
So much incredible history.
Indeed.
Tell us a little bit about yourself. I think it's incredible. You entered the ministry at the tender age of 15?
Yes. Yes.
And you have come to be known as the liberation theologian.
Yes. Black liberation theologian.
What is that?
I believe that the gospel of Jesus Christ provides all of the necessary ingredients for social freedom for all persons who live at pavement level. So I view myself as a prophetic advocate for the marginalized. So I view my job as social justice work every day, not just pulpit work on Sunday.
But you also have another moniker, the picketing preacher.
The picketing preacher, you better believe it. If there is a good fight, in the words of the late Vernon Johns, who was just prior to Martin Luther King in Alabama at Dexter Avenue Church, he once said, when you see a good fight, get in it.
That is your mantra.
That's it. You better believe it.
I have to ask you about this.
Sure.
Enlighten us. I read about you that through your sermons, that dormant levels of consciousness will be awakened as a rose, reveling in unfurled glory for the first time before the heavens. Very poetic.
Yes.
Enlighten us.
I believe through sermons, through talks, through lectures, that my first obligation is to encourage the mind to imagine a bigger, brighter, more prosperous world. And we do that through first encouraging persons to think. Don't just take my word for it, but think about it, ponder it. Imagine yourself envisioning what Dr. King regarded as beloved community and actually making it happen.
Reverend Bird, what a pleasure to have you with us.
Thrilled to be
Thank
here.
you. And
honored.
The doors are open at Mother Zion Church.
Doors are open. We welcome all to come.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And we're going to take a break. When we come back, we'll talk about that debate, Mayor Bloomberg's debut in the presidential sweepstakes. We'll be right back.
You're watching New York's very own Pix 11 News Closeup with Marvin Scott.
Former New York Mayor Mike Bloomberg, he had his debut in the Democratic debate stage Wednesday night, and as some described it, he became a $58 billion punching bag, with 5 other presidential contenders giving him a relentless beating. Pix 11 political analyst Morgan Peckma joining me now for a take on the debate. He spent $400 million so far. And what did you take away from that?
Oh, man,
debate?
it was brutal, Marvin. Mayor Bloomberg took it from all directions, particularly from Senator Elizabeth Warren, who right out of the gate stuck it to him. And it was just surprising how ill-prepared he was for these obvious lines of attack about his taxes, about the enormous amount of money that he spent, about these non-disclosure agreements that he has with women who have accused him or the company of sexual harassment. It was really shocking that he wasn't better prepared for the big stage.
Some suggested really it was a message of his strength, that the others were beating up on him because they're worried about him.
Perhaps. I mean, you can't go anywhere without hearing one of his commercials on the radio or on television or seeing it on the internet. But at the same time, I think they were testing to see his fortitude as a candidate, and he didn't demonstrate that he was ready for the big stage.
Now, how did you think Elizabeth Warren fared with all those punches?
I think Elizabeth Warren was the clear winner in the debate. Oftentimes, the outcome is kind of subjective, but I think anyone who watched that debate saw that she won and Mike Bloomberg was decidedly the loser.
Now, the debate was low on policies, and we've seen others where the candidates, they've disagreed with one another, but they all seem to have one goal in mind, was to punch Mike Bloomberg out of that race.
Well, I think, they need to try to thin out the field here. You saw Pete Buttigieg and Amy Klobuchar go at each other. Now that they are down to 6 candidates, they're trying to, lift their own candidacies by pushing somebody else out of the race.
Now, you feel that Elizabeth Warren was really the victor in that debate?
Absolutely, she was. Her responses were crisp. She was able to take complicated issues and boil them down to accessible nuggets for the American public. And she really showed herself to be a fighter, and it was by far her best performance of the campaign season so far.
Now, Bernie Sanders, he was hammering away at Mayor Bloomberg's stop and frisk policy.
Right, and it was back and forth. And it was amazing that Mayor Bloomberg wasn't ready to give a more robust defense of stop and frisk, because it's been an issue that he's already apologized about, and it is a great weakness of his, particularly with people of color. And sir, please go ahead, Myron.
Now, so how is this going to affect him going forward? I mean, this was his debut, and I know he's been targeting Super Tuesday coming up March 3rd.
Well, it's really the most engaged voters who watch these debates. Most people, maybe they heard about the aftermath of the debate, but they probably didn't watch themselves, so they don't know what a disaster it was for the mayor. But of course, he has a bottomless well of money. And even this morning, when I walked into the deli, I heard his radio commercial on, and I suspect that he's going to double down by spending more and more money. And that is a complete X factor in American politics. We've never seen anybody with unlimited amounts of money to try to shape the national conversation.
I think Amy Klobuchar says we don't need someone richer than the current guy in the White House.
Yeah, certainly there is a very strong argument to be made that Mike Bloomberg doesn't cut the right contrast to Donald Trump, who has sold himself as a successful businessman, and that maybe the Democrats need a decidedly different looking candidate.
Well, from what we know of Mayor Bloomberg during his years here in City Hall, he's not that kind of a fighter as we saw the other day. He didn't know how to respond to all of those negative questions thrown at him. But he did have one blast at Sanders, said that he didn't think America is ready for a socialist president.
That's unclear. Of course, that's completely untested that we would have a Democratic nominee who describes himself as a democratic socialist. And as you rightly said about Mayor Bloomberg, look, he is a technocrat. He was successful as a mayor of New York as a technocrat, but he bristles at answering questions. He doesn't like to have his judgment undermined, and he thinks that, I should just be able to look forward and accomplish my goals, not have to go back and defend my record.
That's the way we remember him. How about Amy Klobuchar? She seemed to drop in the debate the other day. Is she about finished?
I think she's definitely struggling. I think more was made of her third place finish in New Hampshire than it was probably merited. And certainly Pete Buttigieg really went right at her, and she didn't seem to take that criticism very well.
And how about former Vice President Biden?
The bar is so low for Vice President Biden to perform well in these debates. His performance did get some applause, but it was mediocre at best, and he seems to be fading from the race. A lot will depend upon Nevada and South Carolina.
Now, the debate is an indicator of a nasty and bitter campaign season ahead, obviously, before that nomination.
Is campaign season ever not nasty and bitter? Isn't that the way that you win the race?
Okay.
I mean, let's remember the Republican primary
Sanders,
last time.
We can't talk about Nevada because we're taping this on Friday and it's tomorrow, so we don't know the results in Nevada yet. But Sanders he went in as the front runner, correct?
That's right, and whatever happens in Nevada was amazing.
Okay, Morgan Beckman, always a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Marvin.
And that'll do it for our program this week. If you have any comments or wish to see this broadcast again, log on to our website, pix11.com/newscloseup. Up next, Greta Van Susteren and Full Court Press. I'm Marvin Scott. Thanks so much for joining us. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday, everyone.